We will remain at recess at this time until we establish a quorum. Okay, the committee of the whole is back from recess. We have now SB 276 TCN L12 P164. That's line 12, page 164. Increase of Guam charter schools per pupil cost, introduced by Senator Nelson and co-sponsored by Senator San Augustine. Senator Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to add a new Section 20 to Chapter 13 for the bill to read increase of Guam charter schools per pupil cost. Imagahagan Guahan is authorized to expend $962,500 from the unappropriated excess general fund revenues of fiscal year 2022 to pay an additional $500 per pupil pursuant to Section 3, Part 2, Chapter 2 of this Act. This section shall only be effective should the provision in Section 6 Alpha of Chapter 1 of this Act not be fulfilled. So we were anticipating to receive, according to BBMAR, about $80 million in Section 30 funds, which was initially going to provide the revenue source for the additional $500 per pupil. However, we later on, a couple days later after we made that amendment and other amendments also anticipating the $80 million Section 30 funds coming in for FY2023, there was a news release out that said that there was an anticipated 70+ million to come forward. So just to ensure that the charter schools do get their $500 per pupil, I'm including this amendment so that it is only effective if in Section 6 Alpha in Chapter 1, that's where we added the Section 30 funds for charter schools, if that provision is not fulfilled, then we utilize this funding source. So I humbly ask for your support. I did speak with the OFB chair, and he did confirm that this is still feasible. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, anyone on the amendment? Senator Bloss?
Just a question for the author of the amendment, if she can yield. Is this, so is this, because I remember having this conversation when we were talking about the increase for the charter schools in the earlier chapter. So is this just an affirmation of that process?
Does the author yield?
Can the good senator
Repeat the question.
Yeah.
So,
Senator Bloss, please.
what does he mean by affirmation of this process?
So,
what
so
is this process that
like
he's talking
as
about?
we were doing in the previous chapters and everything is basically the appropriations were made, and then in the miscellaneous and now in the administrative provisions, what we're doing is affirming and basically providing the explanation as to what the funding source is and what it was for. I'm not opposing you. I'm just wanting clarity on what this is. Because obviously this is not an appropriation. This is because it is in the wrong chapter. And I realize this because it's just an authorization. So is this authorization an affirmation of the appropriation previously made?
Senator Nelson.
Okay. It's a filler should the appropriation of the Section 30 funds not come through. I am not affirming the process on where we input things, if that's what he's asking.
Senator Bloss.
I appreciate the answer, and again, I just want to make sure that it holds water, because if, quite honestly, I'm a little concerned about it being the filler, a just-in-case measure, because it may not be in the proper section. okay? And for lack of not, I don't want to belabor the whole thing. Go around and ask questions and everything, and I can, or bring other, let me talk to OB. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question. I do recall that we bookmarked that chapter. Was that amendment passed? If I can get a confirmation on that.
Sorry, Senator Perez, your question is for,
Maybe we can get a recess just to confirm whether the previous amendment was passed. 'Cause
Mr. Chair, I can yield to the question if she's more specific on previous amendment, because we've done over how many amendments?
Yes.
What amendment is this specifically?
Yeah, so I do recall when we were in Chapter 2, we bookmarked 2 amendments. And just wanted to make sure, did we go back to that Chapter 2, or was it even passed? I mean, I do recall we bookmarked these 2 amendments. The one involving the use of Section 30 funds for the increase, $500 increase per pupil. So my recollection was we didn't go back and approve that amendment.
let's take a moment's recess. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did not okay, let me take a step back. Yes, we originally bookmarked Chapter 2. However, as we proceeded with the budget, we ended up closing Chapter 2. And the provision that secures the $500 per pupil is not in Chapter 2. It is in Chapter 1, where the appropriations is broken down. And that is closed as well.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Perez?
Yeah, I just maybe would like, I'll talk to clerks afterwards, but I do recall, I do have a copy of the actual amendment itself, and it was in Chapter 2. And so I do recall there was a bookmark for this particular amendment, but we never went back and we didn't dispense with this amendment.
Yeah, it's possible that we didn't go back to the bookmark, and instead that amendment was likely rescinded. I can verify with the clerk. It was probably rescinded and then it's being reproffered.
Okay, I
Or
appreciate-
it was technically never proffered if it was never moved.
Okay.
So it's likely a rescinded if we're talking about the same amendment.
Yes, yes, because this current amendment basically is the backup amendment, right? So, but my recollection is we never did go back and dispense with the first amendment.
Take a moment's recess. Okay, Senator Perez, we're back from recess. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that moment's recess to speak with the clerks and OFB to just ensure that this amendment is in proper order. I think it's always important to kind of do this confirmation, especially at this late hour. The other thing, maybe the question that I have is in regards to the source of funding. So what does this do to the other amendments that we passed? So in this particular one, the source of funding is unappropriated excess general fund revenues in 2022. And so we passed a bunch of amendments for using the audited surplus. So basically this would prioritize this amendment over the other ones that we passed. So like for the hospital, would this put it up front? I guess that's my question.
Senator Nelson, do you yield to the question?
Well, if I was the executive branch interpreting these things, I wouldn't know how they would think on what they would want to prioritize. But I guess that's a good point, because we have the Chapter 1 provision for Section 30 funds, and then this is saying that if there's not enough money in Section 30, and because this amendment refers to an amendment in Chapter 1, then this would take precedence before all the other amendments that have been passed. That's what I would interpret it as, but I'm not the executive branch receiving the budget and dissecting it.
Senator Perez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That answers my question. Thank you.
Anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else, Senator Nelson, you may close. Okay, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. All right, we're on SB 276 TMT L4P116. That's line 4, page 166. Page 166, amendment proffered by Speaker Terlahi, Environmental Health Revolving Fund. Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
All right. All right, Mr. Chair, this is an amendment to convert the existing environmental health fund into a revolving fund, so that the money in that fund shall not lapse and be returned to the general fund or anywhere else, and that it shall stay in that environmental health fund until it's used by the Division of Environmental Health, which is in the Department of Public Health and Social Services. And to include in the enabling legislation for this fund that it can be used for the recruitment of personnel for the Division of Environmental Health, and that it shall not be subject to transfer of the governor out of this fund. These I want to say that what goes into this fund are the penalties when the Division of Environmental Health does inspections or finds violation of health certificates and other violations, and there are fines, that money goes into this fund. And so this is a companion to an earlier amendment where we authorize them to expand their personnel in that division. So this floor amendment makes the authorization granted earlier in the budget bill permanent by amending the statute that established the Environmental Health Fund. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone on the amendment? If not, Speaker, you may close.
I'll waive closing.
Any objection to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276JB, page 166. This is proffered by Senator Joanne Brown. This is to page 166. Sure, this amendment is dealing with the prohibitions on the conviction of official misconduct and absolute bar to employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A public hearing actually was held on the amendment that I'm making about 18 months ago, in February of 2021. And that bill was intended pretty much to prohibit individuals that have been convicted of official misconduct from coming back and being hired in the government of Guam. And I offered this primarily, Mr. Chair, because there was and through this process I found there was a loophole in the law that really allowed individuals to be essentially at the discretion of directors in a department or agency whether or not they chose or would choose to hire someone who had been convicted of official misconduct. I know the Attorney General had provided a comment with regards to that particular issue, that was left up to the discretion of department directors. And I think that's very concerning. Everyone says, oh, well, you need to give everybody a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, and sure. I think you look at the offense and determine whether or not it's something that's recoverable, something someone can grow and recover from, learn a lesson and move forward. But in some cases, to be convicted of official misconduct, this involves individuals that are already in an official government capacity who have committed an offense that they've been charged with, and they have been either plead to official misconduct or they've been convicted of it. And I just really don't think that serves our public very well, especially because in the actions of these individuals in some cases are downright corrupt. We've seen a number of situations, and it's happened more than once, with regards to an example of a department, it's not reflective of all Department of Correction officers, because I have family members who are and have retired who have worked at Department of Corrections. But we've had situations where we've had individuals that have worked there, guards that are law enforcement, that have sworn to hold themselves to a higher standard, who've been very much involved in actively bringing in contraband and drugs into the prison, have been caught, have been charged, have been convicted, and then they turn around within a matter of months and they get hired somewhere else in the government of Guam. And I just don't think that sets, and I think a lot of our people that I meet and talk to don't believe that sets the kind of standard that we should have within our government. I think we need to have standards and expectations of all our public officials, and it's not just limited to elected officials. Certainly elected officials are in very visible positions. But we need to have that expectation of all our employees that are public servants, especially, Mr. Chair, when there are so many hardworking people in our community who would love to have the chance or opportunity, but don't even feel they're given that because they feel the situation is fixed in terms of how and who gets hired and who's connected to who and who's related to who. And even in their best efforts, they just never get the opportunity. And so in all fairness, I'm offering this. I normally would never do this on a budget bill, but I just want to bring this to light because it's interesting how when we have the agenda put forth for session, we have bills that haven't even had public hearings already being put on the agenda. And for those of us, and I know a number of my colleagues on this side of the aisle, have proffered bills that have gone for public hearing and have languished in committees because committee members don't even vote on them. In this particular case, there were 3 members that voted, and the remaining members of the committee chose to do nothing. And so I just think whether you support an issue or not, stand up and be counted, vote yay or nay, and then let the people decide, is that something that's agreeable with them? But I think with all the challenges, Mr. Chair, that our people are going through, especially the amount of crime in this community, I don't think our people should have to accept or continue to encourage or support individuals in their official capacity who have abused the position to which they have been fortunate to have, especially when they misuse the authority to which they have been given. And I think this needs, moving forward, we need to have an expectation that all public officials, regardless of what capacity they serve in this government, are going to be responsible individuals, and they're not going to use and abuse their positions, and they're not going to commit crimes, which is essentially what this is. They're committing a crime against our people, and then we reward them. I am appreciative of anyone who can, make a mistake, because we all do. Maybe they're not all criminal. We all learn. I hope we learn from anything we've done wrong in our lives. But at the same time, I don't think that should put anybody at the front of the line, especially when they're good, hardworking people in this community that, like I said, never, ever, ever get that chance. I don't think it sets the kind of standard and the kind of example. And we've seen examples of how this has been not only acceptable, certainly in this administration, there have been cases that we're fully aware of, and who's connected to who and who's related to who, and who gets the red carpet rolled out for them. And that kind of abuse, I think, needs to stop, and I think there needs to be standards, as I mentioned, with regards to all employees that we hire in this government, and also to send the message that you have to be responsible for the work that you do, that the work that the people of Guam are paying for you to do. If we don't set those standards, we continue to encourage bad behavior, and we continue to encourage corruption in our government. And when that happens, this takes away from the benefits our people should be receiving from their government. We're not here to benefit ourselves, and we're not here to abuse the privilege to which we have been given to work for our people. So I offer this, Mr. Chair. I'm hopeful that my colleagues will support it. And I pretty much, I guess, I can't elaborate any further on as to why I'm putting this amendment forward. But thank you for the opportunity to comment on it.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, anyone on the amendment? Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the intent of this amendment, which is to prohibit employment in the government if you have been convicted of official misconduct. My issue is that the way this is written, it looks like it is going to be applied to employees already employed, and that might be a violation of their civil service rights at this point, because they were hired without that being a requirement. So for future hires, I have no objection, and everyone's put on notice. But to go back and terminate anyone who may violate this provision at this point, I think we need to correct that before we pass that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was my committee that heard this bill on February 24th, 2021. And the committee reports lacked the adequate votes to report it out. And that this amendment, I'm just going to object that this amendment should not be added to the budget bill. And I understand where the author of the amendment has stated, and should be addressed separately as a bill with its own discussion during regular session. I just need to convince the committee members to decide, report out or not, so we can get it out, and then discuss it on the floor and then move from there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? There's no one else on the amendment. Senator Brown, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to belabor the issue, but I think I've made my point. I have no problem having this included as a bill, but again, I just want to bring up, in all fairness, how you treat others. You have an expectation that that's how you're going to be treated, and colleagues, power shifts all the time. Who's in charge today will not be in charge tomorrow, and sometimes when you're not in charge, you find out how ungracious people can be and how people in power will treat you. So I think it's something to be mindful of, because that's something that will come back to haunt you. So be mindful of other colleagues, including minority senators, that put forth, if you don't agree with the idea, then vote it down. But at least put the issue out there, because you know what? When the tables turn, you may not get the same consideration, and I think that would be unfortunate if that were to be the case. You know, you want to treat people how you want to be treated. So I think I've made my point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, there was an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are now on SB 276 ALS 1 LP 166. This is page 166. The amendment is proposed by Senator Shelton. It is amendment to the fiscal authority for the Guam Visitors Bureau. Senator Shelton? This amendment is the one that is striking out section 35.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment to the fiscal authority for Guam Visitors Bureau, section 35 of chapter 12, line 17, page 139 of this act. It's hereby amended as follows, and that's to strike through the entirety of that section 35, which is section 35, fiscal authority for Guam Visitors Bureau for fiscal year 2023, the authority and responsibility found in section 9113B and in section 9110 of chapter 9 of title 12 Guam Code Annotated, as well as section 4105A of chapter 4 or Title 4 Guam Code Annotated shall fall under the authority and responsibility of the General Manager over the Guam Visitors Bureau's business affairs. And that's to strike that entire section through again. Mr. Chair, this was a provision added to miscellaneous provisions, the last chapter, and it is to give the full authority and responsibility over the entire Guam Visitors Bureau's business affairs to the General Manager. And as we know, the setup of the Guam Visitors Bureau is that there is a board with voting members that decide on a budget, approve a budget for management to carry out its functions as the Visitors Bureau. And this was an amendment that had very little mention during a suggestion that had a very little mention during the Guam Visitors Bureau budget hearing several months ago that was not discussed further. And this is a huge change to the makeup and the operations of the Guam Visitors Bureau. We received a couple of days ago, as we were opening chapter 12, a letter from one of the members of the Visitors Bureau discussing concern for this amendment, cutting the board out entirely from overseeing this budget. As we know, the Guam Visitors Bureau does have quite a large budget to work with, and we are seeing tourism numbers pick up more than expected. We've seen that in the media over the last couple of days. Really welcoming news for all of us here in the legislature and for our entire community to see this sector of our economy, which has been hurting so badly over the last several months, now being revived, and as we welcome these visitors back to the island. And this is an amendment that I think is a little concerning for us to slide into the miscellaneous provisions of this bill without having a full public hearing or a bill of its own to change an existing part of Guam code that has governed the Guam Visitors Bureau for years. And if that's something that we want to consider down the line, I welcome that in the Committee on Tourism for us to entertain that sort of bill, but not to be done in the Budget Act, to take complete power away from the board of the Guam Visitors Bureau and give it to the general manager of the Guam Visitors Bureau to have full reign when we have this working body that is here to serve our island, made up of appointees from the legislature, appointees from the governor, and those who are elected among the tourism industry. And so these are all members that we know have the best interests of the tourism industry at heart and who are working diligently to ensure that the money of the Guam Visitors Bureau is used to promote Guam, to invite visitors here, to market the island, and to bring visitors here as one of the pillars of our economy. So I ask my colleagues to please support this amendment, to strike through this language, and let's address this at a separate time apart from the budget. So just Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleagues, I made sure it passed out the letter, the minutes of their last meeting. The GVB Board of Directors placed a self-imposed suspension of all board meetings during their May 12, 2022. Meeting our concerns of their legal counsel's guidance on the corporate structure, specifically on board members not having legal representation until the bylaws and enabling laws are more congruent. During the GVB FY2023 budget hearing, a request was made by the Bureau to add the language that would authorize the President and CEO found in Section 35, Chapter 12, that would grant the authority to the General Manager or President of the GVB with physical authority only for FY23. Mr. Chairman, the language included in Section 35 was simply to allow the Bureau to continue operating and fulfilling their mission to promote Guam and rebuilding the visitors industry and keeping Guam a beautiful destination for our visitors and home for our people. I ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment so we can ensure that one of our island's primary economic industry may continue to do their work in bringing our visitors to enjoy our beautiful island. Zeus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. So is that an objection to the amendment?
That's correct.
Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Schultz, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have all read in the newspaper how disagreements with the board and they're trying to resolve these issues through the work of legal counsel and confirming whether their bylaws and their enabling statutes are in line. But as the proffer of the amendment said, the section of the bill that we are looking at of our budget bill, and this was put into the budget bill again without any public hearing, this is to pretty much repeal these sections of the enabling statute of GVB without any input of the board, without a public hearing or notice to the public that we are going to repeal these sections of GVB. And these sections in particular talk about who will create the personnel rules and regs and so they're repealing the statute that says that the board of directors for the Guam Visitors Bureau will be in charge of doing the rules and regulations for personnel. And 9113B, which is all funds appropriated to the Bureau by the government of Guam shall be considered grants and aid. No disbursement of funds of the Bureau shall be made unless the same has been approved, authorized, and ordered by the Board of Directors. This is a huge shift if we're going to repeal that out of an enabling statute without more vetting, Mr. Chair. And so if this is what we're going to consider doing, then I say put it in a bill, let's consider it, and let's do it if necessary. But to do it like this, even for one fiscal year, I think is unprecedented. I've never heard of any board's authority being revoked by the legislature, over a disagreement. And that I would encourage all of the parties to just work that out and encourage the governor to assist them in working that out as quickly as possible. And otherwise, all of the funds, it looks to me like repealing this section of the code is repealing a big, huge chunk of how GVB was set up, and that is who's going to manage this special fund that we have created, this tourist attraction fund, and the allocation of it. Now, we have all seen in the past, the board kind of sets out a budget and then leaves that to the director or the executive officer to manage. And so I do believe that they should be able to work that out. And I would encourage them to do that as opposed to this. This is on us. This is the legislature revoking enabling statutes of the Guam Visitors Bureau. And while we have a little chaos maybe right now, I think that would create a lot more chaos and set really an unprecedented path for our visitor industry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else, Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's important when we're passing law that the public be noted properly, and this part of this bill had no public hearing. And in our statute, it states that no bill may be passed by legislatura unless it has received a public hearing. I feel this is a substantive change that requires more vetting and input. And I agree with the retiring speaker that, whatever the difficulties are between the board and the CEO, that I believe that it can be worked out despite, how difficult it was. But I do believe that with more transparency and public input, I think we can overcome the difficulties. And so I rise in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I concur, with the retiring speakers. This has been a difficult situation. And it's really important, at least to me as well. We have instrumentalities of the government that, as public corporations, in their iteration of how they came to be, and the power that exists, within the entities. And a good public discourse on this process, in my opinion, is important. Because I'll call it for what it is. Obviously, there is a power struggle. And it's dealing with millions of dollars. And it's dealing with a situation whereby we're marketing Guam through this public corporation. And if there's issues, these issues should be resolved in a way that thoroughly vets what the arrangement is and what it's supposed to be. I mean, if there are challenges to the makeup, if there are challenges to how the entity operates, whether a board is ministerial, whether a board is governing. And Mr. Chairman, I've dealt with this before. It is very similar to, I believe, the structure of Guam Housing Corporation. And it's on the record. I've had differences, but I settled the differences based on the fact that I've accepted the duty and responsibility as having been nominated and confirmed that the board would have the final say. And what I would do is put my differences on the record so that I covered myself, but I basically put out that the decision, as far as I was concerned and knew the construction of the institution, was such that that is where the control was. I know it's not a comfortable position to be in, but yet it's unique in and of itself. So my issue is, I just don't think that this is the way to handle this is to have an open conversation and deal with the issue the way that it should be done. And I don't think that adding at this point to that confusion is something that is going to help anything. And so a discussion like this should be publicly heard so that we can ascertain what are the ramifications and deal with it up front. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I do agree with this amendment, and I hope that it passes. Sijus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Shelton, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. During the budget hearing, one of the requests of our colleagues here was that we have an informational hearing to discuss further the concerns that many of us have with the board functions and what the board would do moving forward and if there would be legislation needed. And I think we were all in agreement that that info hearing would come first before any kind of decision, though this is not permanent beyond the fiscal year, the new fiscal year 2023. A year is a long time to have this kind of decision be made for the board to be put on pause. And the board did itself vote to suspend meetings until it works on its bylaws, until it amends its bylaws. But as we know, a board action, a resolution by the board, a motion by a board does not change what is in our statute, what is in the Guam Code. And so the bylaws of the Board of Directors, a resolution by the Board of Directors does not trump the statute that already exists that is before us today. And as our colleagues have said here, that a decision this big deserves its own public hearing, deserves to be discussed at length for us to hear the potential consequences. And we are thankful to the GVB management as they continue on with their corrective action planning, and to the board, who I know is willing to meet, wants to meet, though they need some further guidance. And we're willing in the Committee on Tourism to work together to have this informational hearing, to address it through legislation the proper way, fully vetted, before making any rash decisions such as this. So I ask my colleagues today to support this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your
Roll
hand.
call.
Is there an opportunity to ask a question for legal to verify, would this, I don't know, maybe I'll ask later, but I'm just wondering what effect this would have on the budget bill. If this passes and it goes against law, does this bill become now unlawful?
I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. I'm sorry. There was who called for roll call? Okay, there's been 3 calls for roll call, so we will do a roll call. We need motion.
I'd ask that the senators attend.
Motion to excuse any senators absent.
Okay. There was a motion to excuse. There's been an objection. All those in favor of excusing members who are not present signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Take a moment's recess. Okay, the committee of the whole is back from recess. I am going to call for the vote. The motion to excuse members not present failed, so that means we will proceed with the vote with those members that are here, and whoever is not here is counted as an unexcused absence. On the amendment, there was an objection. All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your hand. I'm sorry, it was a roll call, excuse me. Madam Clerk, let's proceed with the roll call.
Senator Atta.
Can I make a motion for the members that are not here to be excused when it was ready to identify they're unexcused?
That motion failed already.
Okay.
I request for a recess. There are members on their way.
We'll proceed with the roll call.
I request for a recess. There are members on the way that don't want to be unexcused.
We're just going to proceed with the vote at this time.
Mr. Chairman, there is no reason for you to proceed with the vote when you're going to make people unexcused who can vote.
Yes, understood. However, I'm proceeding with the vote. If you'd like to challenge the ruling of the chair, you may.
Challenge the ruling of the chair.
There's a challenge to the ruling of the chair. All those in favor?
Motion for recess.
That's the same ruling on the motion to recess. All those in favor signify, all those in favor of the, excuse me, on the motion to challenge the ruling of the chair, all those in favor signify by raising your hand.
Did we vote on?
Motion fails. We'll proceed with the roll call.
Motion for recess? Motion for recess.
It's out of order. Madam Clerk, please proceed with the roll call. We're in the middle of voting.
Senator Atta, nay. Senator Blas. Senator Blas, nay. Senator Brown. Senator Brown, nay. Senator Duenas. Aye. Senator Duenas, aye. Senator Moylan.
I'd like to make a motion.
We're in the middle of the roll call.
Senator Moylan, nay. Vice Speaker Munya Barnes.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes. She has stated her reason for not being here, which is the death of her mother and family rosaries. So my motion is to excuse her.
There's a motion to excuse the Vice Speaker. Any objection? Seeing none, motion carries.
Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes excused. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, nay. Senator Perez. Senator Perez, aye. Senator Rangel. Nay. Senator Rangel, nay. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, nay. Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton, aye. Senator Tydegui.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to allow Senator Ada to vote since he is now here and relieve him of the unexcused absence. So I'd like to have him for the record. But since it was my name next, Mr. Chair, if I may, I vote nay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take that motion. Is there any objection to allow Senator Ada to vote now that he is present? Seeing none, motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had to excuse myself. My brother's wife passed away, and I just went to the Mass and consoled my brother, so.
Understood.
Senator Tydegui, nay. Senator Terlahi. Senator Terlahi, nay. Speaker Terlahi. Speaker Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres.
Is there a motion to excuse Senator Torres?
There's a motion to excuse Senator Torres. Any objections to that motion? Seeing none, motion carries.
Senator Torres excused. Senator Ada.
Yes.
Senator Ada, aye.
There are 5 ayes, 8 nays, 2 excused. Motion fails. We are now on SB 276, ALS 2, page 166. Proposed by Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's regarding the same subject matter, fiscal authority for the Guam Visitors Bureau. To read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, the authority and responsibility over the Guam Visitors Bureau's fiscal and personnel matters, as outlined in Section 9113B and in Section 9110 of Chapter 9 of Title 12 Guam Code Annotated, as well as Section 4105A of Chapter 4 of Title 4 Guam Code Annotated, shall be carried out and exercised by the Board of Directors of the Guam Visitors Bureau, and B, to delete Section 35 of Chapter 12, line 17, page 139 of this Act in its entirety. I don't need to explain, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment, Senator Tydegui, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, we just had the same exact amendment, very similar to, and ask that as the chairman, that you make a ruling that this is out of order since this has already been addressed in the prior amendment. It does the same exact thing, and ask for you to make a ruling.
Senator Tyree, I'm just going to go ahead and call for the vote. It's a bit unclear as to whether or not it can be ruled out of order, in my opinion. Also, I believe we've accepted similar amendments in the past where they're just worded slightly differently. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with this amendment. All those, anyone else on the amendment? Senator Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'd just like to say the current substitute budget bill includes provisions in it, which we are considering right now, which revoke the enabling statutes of the Guam Visitors Bureau. And it does this without a bill, without a public hearing, without any input from the community, without input from the board, whose powers this substitute bill revokes in all matters regarding personnel and all matters and all fiscal matters. And while I understand there may be some conflict as to how things are handled down there, I can't see the rationale in revoking an enabling statute without any vetting. I can't see the urgency of that. I can't see why we would want to set precedent like that, where any board who can't get along, we will just revoke their authority. Or if they have a disagreement with the general manager, this is not the first time the board has had a disagreement with the CEO. Before, it was the opposite. The board was taking control of personnel matters because they didn't like the way the CEO was handling it. And now we're revoking, some people might not like the way the board is handling personnel matters, I'm not sure. And that they want to revoke the board's authority now and put that all, I mean, we are, it's really unprecedented. And it's definitely unprecedented that we're going to throw it into a budget bill and do it without any vetting. Look at the board and the CEO themselves. They're going through their legal counsel. They're trying to resolve the discrepancies between bylaws and enabling statutes, and hopefully come up with a resolution or recommendations for us to change their enabling statute if necessary. But don't forget, this board is a board that's been subject to litigation in the past. The authority, who has the authority? And the accounts that they manage are huge. They are critical to revitalization of our entire tourism industry. So I just think that what we're talking about is such a big, it's a complete reversal of the governing structure of the Guam Visitors Bureau. It's being done without any notice, and it's not even really explained in the bill, the rationale behind it. And I just hate to think that we're going to be running a government when, we all know certain agencies with different personnel, operate differently. But that doesn't mean when we don't like certain things that we just change the entire governing structure or we change the entire enabling statutes. And all we're asking is that they stick it out and resolve this issue as opposed to giving up for the entire fiscal year fiscal authority. It's regardless of how much we might like one person or they're a good manager, regardless of that, this was set up in a certain way for certain reasons, and if we want to revoke it, we need to do that again, like all legislatures have done, in the right way, by having a hearing on it and bringing in the public and bringing in the experts. Let the lawyers tell us what is the conflict. It's not very obvious to us in here, except, every side has their own idea of what the conflict is, but I think it has to be resolved. And I cannot imagine that it's something that everyone in here is an expert on. And I think, we may be voting instead of based on facts. We're allowing this revocation of an enabling statute and fiscal authority in a board versus one CEO. Without having the full picture in front of us. And that's all I ask. Let's get the full picture in front of us, and then let's make a decision. If it's up to us and we need to act, if this board cannot resolve it, and I have full faith that with the oversight chair, the board, the governor, that they're going to come to a resolution just like every board of this government is expected to do. So I support this amendment, and I think it should get passed. It says that fiscal authority will be exercised by the board of directors of the Guam Visitors Bureau. That's consistent with the current enabling statute. And it says that personnel matters will be exercised by the board of directors. And that is consistent with the enabling statute, and that we not reverse it. We not allow this substitute budget bill to completely reverse that authority. Again, this was not any provision that was recommended by the governor either, and so I object to that. I concur with this amendment being made to repeal, to set straight the authority in the Guam Visitors Bureau, to make it consistent with its enabling statute until further amendment by the legislature. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for OFB.
State your question.
So in the budget, we've actually projected that we are supposed to receive $13 million, a little over $13 million from the Tourist Attraction Fund. And being that we're on the verge of rebounding our visitors' arrivals or visitor economy, what happens to the extra money? What happens to the oversight of that extra money? Or what happens to that extra money if we do rebound quickly?
Senator San Augustine, do you yield?
Mr. Chair, I just want to try to focus on the amendment, and I'm trying to understand the question, how it relates to the amendment. Just so that I'm staying on track.
Do you yield to the question?
I can't yield when I don't understand what it's trying to get at. It's not talking about the funding or the excess. The amendment doesn't talk about it. It just talks about what the amendment is asking for. And I just want clarity to what is its relationship to the amendment. And then we move on. And then I may yield to it.
Senator Perez, would you like to restate your question?
Yeah, so it's definitely related to the amendment because with the current bill, what it does, it removes oversight authority on the spending of Guam Visitors Bureau by the board. And so we're projecting a certain amount. What happens to the extra money if the board is not overseeing that?
Senator San Augustine?
All right, I'll yield to that. Number one, let's start with first, the GVB Board of Directors they self-impose a suspension from their activity. This is just allowing the general manager to run the business, get the GVB, get our third leg of our economy back on track. And I've stated earlier, this is for FY2023. Now, what happens to the money? It's at GVB. The general manager continues to run the operation so we can get back on track for tourism. And then we move from there.
Senator Perez.
So where are the controls as far as expenditure of public funds? Is it weakened by removing the enabling statute?
That
to
question
OFB?
is for
Yeah, to OFB.
Senator San Augustine. Do you yield to the question?
Does it weaken? My answer is no.
Senator Perez.
So basically what you're saying is that without an enabling statute, that the money will be handled with proper oversight. Because GVB has their own procurement authority. And when you remove that board, then you lose an important part of oversight of expenditure of public funds. So I guess my point is that, you know, we in this body have been advocating for transparency and accountability, and we're moving in a very important part of that when it comes to large sums of money. And especially, we don't know for sure whether that's going to increase by a large amount. So again, I think it's really important that we're not undoing the controls of public expenditure. You know, the controls, the guardrails of how to expend money. We've been down this road before, you know, with the quarantine facilities. And when we try to cut corners, we end up hurting ourselves. So this particular change is making a drastic change in that ability for our government to provide that accountability and transparency of large sums of money. We spent months debating this bill, every penny, it seems. And now we're willing to open a huge hole where we're going to look the other way. And this requires, I believe, a separate bill with proper vetting. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we look at page 139, my colleagues, on section 35, it says, for fiscal year 2023, the authority and responsibility found in that law, in that code, further down, shall fall under the authority and responsibility of the general manager over the GVB, Business Affairs. As everybody or whoever spoke earlier says, it takes away the statute. No, it doesn't. It specifically says FY23. Now, if the board of directors self-impose, what are we supposed to do? Say, okay, don't do anything, GVB. Even the general manager. That's what we're basically saying. No, let the board figure it out. I think you said it earlier. You snooze, you lose. Get on track. The economy is trying its best to rebound on the tourism. We need to move forward, and that's why I would object to this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Shelton, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I agree that we need to move forward, and I think we need to do so properly with vetting for such a big change to what the enabling legislation of GVB is, an entire change to the way the Guam Visitors Bureau works and does business. And Mr. Chair, I think we've said it all in the last amendment. Our colleagues have discussed it all again, but this is a matter that deserves more discussion in its own public hearing, an informational hearing, a separate bill, because the board of directors is still mandated by our Guam Code, our law, to carry out its functions, its business and fiduciary duties, to spend the money of the Guam Visitors Bureau that comes in through the Tourist Attraction Fund and other funds for us to promote and market Guam to potential tourists, as well as lots of other projects that we are very happy to have GVB help us with all over the island, beautification, safety, all in the name of tourism and for our people to enjoy and to take part in recreation and really take advantage of all that Guam has to offer. This is an amendment that will protect the function of the Bureau and allow us to protect the public funds that we are collecting to be used in the best way possible. Last term, in the 35th Guam Legislature, when the Leon Guerrero Tenorio administration first came in, a big part of what they did was taking a long, hard look at the different boards and commissions throughout our government, giving suggestions of what could be consolidated, what could be totally eliminated. And many of us as oversight chairs for different agencies introduced legislation, went through the entire process of public hearings, hearing from the agencies, working with these boards to make the changes necessary to make them more efficient and more effective. And this provision in the miscellaneous provisions of this budget is not a just way to do this for our Guam Visitors Bureau, for our island that is so heavily depending on the rebound of our tourism industry. And we have so much to look forward to. We know that things are really turning around for us. We are seeing tourists walking up and down Hagåtña. They're coming into our building. We know that that money is going to start flowing in. We've turned a corner from this pandemic. And so now, colleagues, I ask that you help us make the wisest decision here tonight to keep the function of the board to utilize this money. So just Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment, there's been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. The next amendment is SB 276 TMB L4 P166. This, the author is Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz Barnes. It is to line 4, page 166. Section 26, notification of temporary assignment or detail. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is notwithstanding in every other provision of law, every agency must give notice to Magahagan, Guam, and the Speaker of the Legislature of every temporary assignment or detail that has surpassed 30 days. This notice must be submitted within 48 hours. While temporary assignments and details can be used to ensure vital government operations continue, we must not let these temporary assignments become permanent or withhold proper pay from our government employees. By requiring agencies to submit this notice every time a temporary detail goes beyond 30 days, we're holding them accountable and protect the employees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment, Senator Blas, then Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just have one question. If I know it's not the author, but the mover of the amendment can yield to the question. It says, shall be reported in 60 days to who?
Does the mover yield?
What was the question?
Please repeat the question, Senator Blas.
The amendment says, notwithstanding a provision of law, must give notice to the Magahagan Guam and the Speaker. Agent, 30 seconds, please.
Moment's recess. Senator Bloss, sorry. We're back from a short recess. Senator Bloss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, Mr. Chair, I was looking at this, and while this may be, again, I think this helps to address what unfortunately is becoming a problem within the government of Guam, where you got individuals who are detailed to positions in a higher grade and with more responsibility than what they are being paid to do, and don't receive the compensation or the recognition for that. And so, you've got I'm not saying that this is an example, okay? You've got a sergeant doing a captain's work, and you keep that individual for a prolonged period of time there, and it really does not do any justice for that sergeant, because then come time for his evaluations and everything, he is now being evaluated as a captain as opposed to what his position is and not getting paid for it. So what this provision will be able to provide is some paper trail, if you will, of these details of these temporary assignments. And hopefully that within that, we can curtail and stop this practice of detailing individuals and not providing them the proper compensation for this. I know this is probably funny coming from a Republican, but this is basic sense for human relations within the workplace. And so, with that, Mr. Chair, I support this amendment. And I thank the good mover of the amendment. He is not the author. He's doing a good job in trying to move things that I didn't want to put him in a position where he had to answer a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bloss. On the amendment, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. There are a number of GovGuam employees temporarily assigned or detailed to a position that is a step higher than the position that they were hired at, without the issuance of wages for that position. According to GCA, if an employee is temporarily assigned or detailed for 90 or more days, wages are to be paid appropriately. In GDOE, there are an estimated 200 plus employees assigned or detailed to a position a step higher than their current position and have been in this status beyond 90 days, along with Guam Fire Department. The benefit of addressing this issue will help personnel feel heard and acknowledge that they are qualified for the temporary position and could potentially aim to permanentize their status. The disadvantage of not acknowledging this disparity costs the government to lose not just the institutional knowledge, but dedicated and highly qualified personnel. We see this in GDOE as well as Guam Fire Department. Supporting this amendment will be one of the many steps needed to address disparities in the workplace and ultimately boost the morale that is needed for the health work environment. It would also help shore up the merit system. And I ask my colleagues for their support. Situas Masi.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment, which requires that if someone's detailed for 30 days or more, that notice be given to the governor and to the speaker. Notice will help to ensure that the law is followed. We have a letter from Guam Federation of Teachers, Mr. Robert Koss, that discusses how assignments, detail assignments, despite the laws requiring that they be paid if detailed for a certain amount of time, that these people have not been paid, and that even the grievances that they have brought have been found to be untimely because the detail has gone on for so long. And I think we have employees that are very, very good-hearted and willing to put in time for the government and do step up, literally step up when necessary. And we've seen them do this time and again. And so I think this amendment will definitely help to ensure that they are paid for the time that they are mandated by law to be paid, and that oversight will be easier to control with this reporting requirement in this amendment. So I support the amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment, Senator Tideway, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a real quick, comment. I totally support this amendment. I kind of wish that there was another amendment that was supposed to be proffered, but I don't think it's going to get on the floor because of some issue on penalizing directors, agency heads, in the event they don't follow through with providing the information or the detail. But it's such a shame to hear that, working individuals in the government of Guam who are transferred out to go to another area for a certain amount of time and doing the work of someone who receives at least $10,000 more if that position was filled. So it's very unfair. And I like the fact that this one, other than the other amendment, required 60 days, but this one is 30 days, surpassing 30 days. I think that's even better. The 60 days was quite long. But I think it's something that we need to really look into to provide even some more incentives with regards to agencies' heads doing things like this and transferring individuals who've, without their agreement to go to another department and do something else that they were not, they didn't sign up for. I think we should have the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to really look into this more in detail and provide some type of, penalty for these agency heads if we can. So I stand in full support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tideway. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator San Augustine, you may close. Are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are on SB 276 TCN L4 P166. That's line 4, page 166, proffered by Senator Talina Nelson. This is to Section 26, the Guam Department of Education. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment reads, the Guam Department of Education is hereby authorized to submit federally funded contracts valued at less than $500,000 directly to the Office of the Governor for review and approval, provided that the Superintendent of Education has approved and signed said contracts with approval as to legality and form by the attorneys for the Guam Department of Education. This provision shall expire at the end of fiscal year 2024. And Mr. Chair, it was brought up earlier in this month during the budget session, the challenges that the Guam Department of Education has had with the procurement process. And some of the challenges is, and some of the tangible items that we were asking him earlier today about fixing the awnings, fixing the restrooms, fixing the air conditioners. What is the delay if they have hundreds of millions of dollars in CIP money to do so? And he explained that the delay is really in the procurement process. And so also they explained that, they have this amount of money, this $100 million from the ARP funds to exercise. However, they do not guarantee that they will be able to do that if they continue with the current processes in place. And so I spoke with the acting superintendent with review of their attorneys, and this is the provision that they submitted, asking if we could support this provision. Now, this provision is specifically for federal funds, so it's only for projects or items that are procured through federal funding. And we all understand that when it comes to federal funding, there's a huge amount of checks and balances and accountability. And so I felt comfortable in producing this amendment, and I humbly ask that my colleagues support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to object to this amendment. Also, in the testimony that was given, they only had 2 procurement personnel that were fully trained. And really, I think the need is to have the procurement staff, really. I think it's unconscionable to have that little staff when dealing with that much funding. So I think the fix is to get the staff and not try to circumvent the procurement law. The thing is, GDOE has their own procurement authority. So it's kind of odd that they are trying to delegate it to the office of the governor when, they are decentralized. And if they want to move towards a centralized procurement, then GSA is the proper place. So, I rise in objection to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, Senator Teitigui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I do have some reservations about this as well. And the speaker before me, who's actually well-versed than most of us when it comes to procurement, and who's actually took the time to take classes, at GCC for procurement, makes perfect sense. And I had an opportunity to talk with her after on this, and I think that there's great concern with regards to this. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sharing my reservations.
Thank you, Senator Teitigui. Anyone else on the amendment? Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been studying this amendment, trying to understand the background of it and why it is necessary and how this is going to help the department. I understand now that it's limited to federally funded contracts only, and maybe with the intention to move those quicker. However, I remember, it's not that long ago when we were in huge trouble with federal funds at DOE, huge trouble. And it was procurement in particular. We were not properly accounting for the procurement or not properly conducting the procurement. And for a long time, that was big news. I'm glad, nowadays that doesn't seem to be an issue. I haven't seen any controversies. And in fact, we've been making lots of progress to get out of, even fiscal accountability. I mean, not to get out of it, but that we've met, fiscal accountability standards there. However, what it looks to me like this amendment is doing is bypassing in current law the requirement that contracts over, well, this is for contracts less than $500,000? I guess if the author would yield exactly what are we bypassing by this amendment? Exactly who or what are we bypassing? Is it the board? Is it the AG's office? Not sure. What are we bypassing by this amendment?
Does the author yield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that it's the Attorney General's office because a lot of the contracts that they write up, there's usually a back and forth involved in the Attorney General's office, and sometimes the Attorney General's office is not as responsive as they would like them to be, and then by that time, they miss the window for the contract.
Thank you to the author for yielding. Okay, well, so I'm reading the statute, and the current statute requires that contracts over the amount of $500,000 are treated differently, and that those contracts must not only be approved by the Attorney General for legality and form, but they must also the Attorney General shall act as legal advisor during all phases of the solicitation or procurement process. When he approves contracts, determine not only the correctness of their form, but their legality. And so it puts a little bit of an additional review by the Attorney General for contracts over $500,000. For contracts less than $500,000, I don't see that in the current statute. It looks like the current statute requires the Attorney General to review as to legality in form contracts under 500. That is existing law. So this amendment that says contracts valued at less than $500,000 are still going to be required to be reviewed for legality informed by the Attorney General, the attorneys for the, oh, I see. It's attorneys for the, okay. They're taking the Attorney General completely out of the process instead using attorneys for the Guam Department of Education. I object to this amendment, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Dueñas, you recognize.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to make this really quick. I object for the reasons by the previous speakers, but also we've seen before where this is something that creates mischief from time to time. You know, so you get some threshold that's established, and then all of a sudden, miraculously, you see multiple contracts, maybe for $499,000. So I object to this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Nelson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's one of the challenges in government, right? We're not trusting. And so we create layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy and nothing moves. And this is the challenges that GDOE faces. There's layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy and nothing's moving. So when we come before them and say, oh, well, look at FP Leon Guerrero. There's rats in the walls. There's water coming off of the ceilings during rain season. The children have to run through the mud, through the rain, because of the layers and layers of bureaucracy. And then we're asking them, well, what can we do to help? Well, this is what we can do to help. But we're not comfortable with this because we don't trust. We don't trust that the attorneys have the best, are able to discern and have the best interests of the students in mind. So what happens to when we don't trust them? When we don't trust them, then nothing gets done. And they sat here for hours on 2 separate occasions explaining to us the challenges that they face. And all of us were like, oh, we want to help you. And another one was because of the teacher pay raise, and the acting superintendent wasn't even present during the teacher pay raise. And we had a budget hearing the day after news media spread that the teachers were getting their pay raise from the governor. The people that were asking the questions weren't even at the budget hearing. And those are the exact same questions I asked the superintendent. And so then they're berating the acting superintendent like it was his decision. And so this is the challenge we have here. So we asked them, what can we do to help you? What can we do to help you fix your restrooms? What can we do to help you fix your classrooms? What can we do to help you fix your awnings? And then they said the biggest challenge they have is at the Attorney General's office. And then one of our good colleagues said, oh, well, maybe if you just write things more specifically. Well, you know what? They got attorneys writing those things. And it could be a disagreement in character, or personalities, that they don't make these things pass. Because many times, Mr. Chair, if there's a disagreement amongst personalities and characters, many people build a wall. And they won't allow anything to move forward because they can't look beyond themselves. They have to look beyond themselves and see what is the greater good here. And the greater good here is that we need to trust GDOE, that their attorneys will be able to move these contracts without the assistance of the Office of the Attorney General, because it's not working for them. It's not. That's why our schools are in disarray. That's why our children are going into restrooms that are unsanitary, unsatisfactory. And then every time they come before us, we're so quick to admonish them for the lack of movement forward. This is a key part for the reason for the lack of movement forward. Now, we're not authorizing them millions and millions of dollars per contract. We're not blindly giving that away. We're getting every $500,000 appropriation. You have that flexibility. It's going to take $500,000 to fix a couple awnings. It's going to take $500,000 to renovate a gym. It's going to take $500,000 to fix the air conditioning. So these projects that we can expedite, this amendment will help do that. But there's no trust. But we need to learn how to trust them a little bit. This is federal funding. This is not local funds. This is federal funding that is being given to them from the federal government. Do you think the federal government is going to turn a blind eye to their actions? Absolutely not. The federal government is going to meticulously check every single dime, cent, and dollar they spend. They're not just going to let things go. Their accountability process is more stringent than us at the local level, at the state level. And so this is where we have to, this is like, I'm asking you colleagues to just see the middle ground a little bit. If they do something wrong, the federal government is going to come. But I guarantee you they know that, and that's why they're going to do the right thing. They understand the role of the federal government, that they will be accountable for this money. It's so easy to point the finger at non-action and say, how can we help you? They give us the provision to help, and we're like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. It's a simple provision. It's so that they can move the money quicker for contracts so that the buildings can get fixed, so that the restrooms can be renovated. Okay. I still have 1 minute and 52 seconds. I hope colleagues like you will reconsider your objection, because there's not many of us here. And it's going to take a lot to get 8 votes on this provision, but this provision will help Guam Department of Education provide a quality facility for our students, for our children. And we can always have another oversight hearing on it in like a month or 2. Is it working? And if it's not working, we can remove it. I'll be the first one to remove it. But I guarantee you that this will work, and I guarantee you that there's accountability here. This is the federal government's money. It's not local dollars. So please just take a quick breath, colleagues, and just think about it. Just give them a chance. I guarantee you I'll have an oversight hearing in 2 months, seeing if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll remove the provision. But just give them a chance. That's all I'm asking. And hopefully we can see change, real change for our facilities and our schools, so that our children can go to school with pride, knowing that they got a clean school. And that's the most basic thing, clean. We're not even asking for like extravagance. It's just so that they can have a clean facility, a safe environment to work in, to learn in, and to be proud about and motivated about learning. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairs.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, there were some objections earlier. Do those objections still stand? There are objections. All those in favor, please, the objections still stand. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are now on SB 276 JCM L4P166. That's line 4, page 166. Amendment proposed by Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. That was a good segue. So this amendment, co-sponsored by Senator Blas and I'm the sponsor. Basically, what we're doing is step upon promotion, right? So we're talking about these classified employees and these grade levels that are promoted competitively or by reclassification or these temporary, placing them in temporary positions, right? While that position is vacant. And that temporary position, specifically what we're looking at is the higher pay grade. And they're supposed to receive a salary increase, a step increase to the pay grade prior to this promotion. But so the situation is that a lot of them don't. So what the amendment does is, notwithstanding any other provisions of the law, rule, or regulations to the contrary, it puts the requirement to ensure that this employee, especially in the temporary position, gets the pay raise that they're supposed to. This gives teeth to the existing bill. Within 60 days, if that employee holding that temporary position, and some have held it, of course, we're talking over 90 days, but in long term, and they're not compensated for it. So whose fault is that when the employee has to step up to that higher position and not get the salary for it? It will be the fault of the supervisor, or in this case, of course, the director holding that responsibility to require the employee to do more but not being paid the share that they should. So the amendment puts the requirement upon the agency head or their deputy until the date they demonstrate to the legislature full compliance for this statute. So that's part A. And part B, basically it goes back 4 years for all these agencies to come up with the list of the number of employees that are in this situation, right? That should be compensated as well. Otherwise, likewise, these agencies, the director heads or the deputies will be automatically reduction in salary of 10% for a responsible agency head, until they figure this out. This was brought to our attention by organizations representing the employees, of course. So it's just giving teeth to the existing bill to say, come on, agency head or deputy director, you're going to put the employee in that position, then pay them responsibly within 60 days, right? If you're going to remove them, of course, before that payment is required, then fine. But if you're going to keep them in there long-term and have no idea when you're going to pay them, it's basically not fair. So this amendment allows some teeth into the current law to require a penalty and maybe push that agency harder to ensure that the right thing is done. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my colleagues' support on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After looking at this amendment, I can understand. Let's go after the directors. I think that's illegal. You can't do that. You got to handle this separately. When anyone is promoted, there's a GG1. There's a process that happens. And when you go through the process, it's within 30 to 60 days that they receive the compensation, and then they catch up. And I know this for a fact because I experienced that when I got rehired. The process, a higher pay. It actually took them almost a whole year. And it's the process. And we're going to say in 60 days or whatever, I'm not comfortable with that. And if there is an action that happens that employees are not being addressed and given their appropriate pay, then they just bring up that issue. Not necessarily to the legislature, but bring the issue up to the appropriate authorities, and then they'll be addressed. Because even if they went to civil service, it ain't gonna happen in 60 days. There's a while, there's a process. And because there's certain sections here that are written that may be illegal, I'd ask that it introduces a bill, and then we try to work this through and get it more clearer and more specific before we just address something that right now on this amendment. I just would object to it at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment. Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
First, I want to say, there's an A and a B in this amendment. A is dealing with promotions. B seems to be dealing with detail of employees. And we just spoke about, the detail of employees and how we all support that they will be compensated as required by law if they are detailed. And so I can see that the intent of this amendment here is to put penalties in statute if employees are not paid or compensated for their detail after a certain number of days. But in the same amendment, they're talking about promotions, and if a person promoted is not if they're not given their salary increase on a promotion, that we're going to automatically penalize the directors. Well, I actually kind of agree with the statements in the fiscal note. This is language from a bill that was introduced in August, and the fiscal note on the bill includes the following comments from Department of Administration. Department of DOA does not support penalizing agency heads for administrative matters. 2, proposed legislation indiscriminately uses the terms promotion and detail. 3, the retroactive provisions of the bill does not have a funding source. 4, an estimated financial impact cannot be determined since details pertaining to the proposed 6206.2 to Chapter 6 have not been reported to DOA. The Bureau notes that 6206 is relative to promotions, and the other section in that bill, 6206.2, is relative to detail appointments. It looks to me like this amendment combined both of them into one statute. Quite confusing. A detail appointment is defined by the rules and regs as a temporary assignment to meet management needs of an employee to another position or to a group of specific duties and responsibilities for a specified period, with the employee returning to his regular duties at the end of the detail. No employee shall be temporarily assigned or detailed to a position, nor shall the employee assume the duties and responsibilities of a position other than the one to which he has been appointed for a period in excess of 120 days within a calendar year. And then it goes on with the whole statute outlining restrictions on detail of employees. But yeah, and so actually detail employees very much restricted, right? Number of days you can do that. Notice has to be given already by statute. And so I would object, first of all, that this detailed statute is being placed together with this promotion language. And then the part where it says, it shall result in a violation, or the agency head fails to pay, it shall result in automatic reduction in salary by 10% for the agency head and their deputy until the date they demonstrate to a legislature in Guam full compliance of the statute. I do not think the legislature should be acting as civil service, and that that this is something that should be resolved by civil service, and that we should resolve the issues that are preventing civil service from finding in favor of the employees when they appeal failure of the agency to pay them for their detail. So, and I think we can still do that, and hopefully, maybe when the underlying bill has a public hearing, and we can more fully vet that and correct those statutes. But I'm not convinced that this is the way to do it, and that penalty of the automatic penalty of the agency head is, I think it should be better framed as to what the civil service is authorized to do, and again, look at the time limits on the employees bringing these actions or complaints or filing claims, because it seems that that is really the issue. It's that even when they file complaints that they haven't been paid, those are not being able to be adjudicated for technical reasons, and that's what we really have to address. And this automatic thing, I think, is just who determines it? Who's going to enforce that? Is it the legislature? According to this, the legislature, they have to demonstrate to the legislature full compliance. Like, we are going to take the salary away from a director. You know, we can't do that, you know. So it's just those things. But I fully agree with the intent. And that's why I say let's work that out in the underlying bill. Let's vet it, and let's put a penalty for non-compliance with that detailed statute, non-payment of people who are, you know, forced to step up and to do extra work, right? That they're not getting paid for. They should be paid, they should be compensated, and there's a way to do that. But I would object to this amendment the way it's written. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the concerns that were brought up by my colleagues in this. And, you know, quite honestly, I find solace in that there was a previous amendment there was an amendment that was previously heard and passed by this body that would help to start to address this concern with regard to detail pay. You know, it was, you know, and, you know, the speaker, the previous speakers have brought some concerns and some issues that we want to make sure that it does pass muster. With that, Mr. Chair, can you give me a moment's recess, please?
Take a moment's recess. back from recess. Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
On the amendment, if there's no one else, Senator Moylan, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues, for the comments. I appreciate the insight and the in-depthness of what we could do to make the bill stronger, of course. I'm sorry, the amendment stronger. And looking forward to, if this doesn't pass, of course, looking forward to a public hearing for this bill. Obviously, we recognize that the employees have a difficulty with this situation, and that's why this bill was brought forward. Of course, I'm always open to any amendments to assist in strengthening this amendment as well. However, at this point, I think we're ready to call it. As far as funding for this, we've seen what other agencies have done by moving funds from what do you call it, CIP, fixing up your place and using ARP money to substitute that. And we also have the transfer authority of the governor to even fund this as well. The idea is that we want to help the employees placed in these positions that aren't being compensated in a timely manner. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate of course, my comments of my colleagues, and I'm looking forward to a favorable decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, are there any objections? There is an objection. There are some objections. All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are now on SB 276 ALS P166, that's page 166, proposed by Senator Amanda Shelton. This is cost of living allowance. Senator
you.
Shelton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment regarding the cost of living allowance. Charity Megahagan Guahan is authorized to expend $1,482,200 from the unappropriated excess general fund revenues of fiscal year 2022 to pay an additional $200 per retiree who qualify for the cost of living allowance payment pursuant to Section 5A of Chapter 11 of this Act. This section shall only be effective should the provision in Section 6B of Chapter 1 of this Act not be fulfilled. Mr. Chair, this is similar to the amendment made earlier in this chapter for the charter schools. In the event that the Section 30 money the excess Section 30 money we appropriated earlier in the Budget Act, we do not see that fulfilled, then the governor has the authority to use excess revenue of the general fund to pay out the extra $200 per retiree for COLA. And as you know, the $1,482,200 is the total to add the additional $200 per retiree. And so this is the same language that we used for the charter schools just a few minutes ago, and I ask our colleagues for their support to secure this additional money to our GovGuam retirees, the cost of living allowance. There was a lot of discussion about it just a few days ago, how much these retirees are looking for an increase. We know the cost of living has gone up across the board, utilities, gas, housing, food costs. Inflation is hitting our people hard, and this is a way for us to provide for our Manamco, our retirees, with this amendment to secure this fund, whether it be from Section 30 or from general fund excess revenue. This money will be there for our retirees. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment. If there's no one on the amendment, Senator Shelton, you may close. Any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276 P166, proposed by Speaker Therese Terlahi, restriction on the use of continuing appropriations. Okay, that amendment has been rescinded. It was based on an amendment to a prior amendment that was previously withdrawn, I believe. So we'll move on to the next amendment, SB 276 TCN1 L4 P166. That's line 4, page 166, proffered by Senator Nelson. Fees and refunds, disposition of fees and refunds. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so this amendment is to add a new section to 21, Chapter 13 of the bill to read Section 26, subsection 1418 of Article 4, Chapter 1, Title 29, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations is hereby amended to read as follows. Subsection 418, fees and refunds, disposition of fees and refunds. All fees received by the Contractors Licensing Board under this chapter shall be deposited by the appointed agent of the Treasurer of Guam with the Treasurer of Guam annually when the amount paid into the Contractors License Board Fund equals the amount appropriated to the board. Any additional receipts during the remainder of the fiscal year shall remain and roll over into the Contractors Licensing Board. So this is just to ensure that the Contract Licensing Board is able to still acquire the remainder of the funds that they, the remainder of fees and refunds that they are able to collect.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment? If there's no one on the amendment, Senator Nelson, you may close. If not, any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276 TCN2 L4 P166. That's proposed by Senator Nelson.
Thank you. This amendment is to add a new Section 27 to Chapter 13 of the bill to read in Section 27, subsection 70119 of Chapter 70, Title 21 Guam Code annotated is hereby amended to read as follows. This fund shall be kept in a bank licensed to do business on Guam, and funds shall be paid out only upon request for payment or requisition submitted by the executive director or its personnel and countersigned by the chairman of the board with approval from the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. The Contracts License Board may have the authority to use funds as deemed necessary to sustain daily operations within the agency. So this is the challenge, Mr. Chair, is like many times we're unable to capture this amount, and they usually come to the legislature when the money's already been depleted. And so I'm hoping that we can ensure that this actually is used for the Contracts License Board so that they can sustain their operations.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. I just want to know why, however, we are including this language with approval from the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. Why does this Contractors Licensing Board have to go through that when they have a special fund dedicated to them where they're getting fees and refunds, and they have, it requires the board to vote and requisition submitted by executive director and countersigned by chairman.
Does the author yield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just wanted to ensure that there was, we talk about extra layer of bureaucracy. So I removed the shall require legislation appropriation, and so that they would be able to obtain it through BBMR.
Speaker Talahi, does that?
Thank you for yielding. I support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Nelson, you may close. Any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276, JB, TTT, JSSA, P166. Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's just in follow-up to our discussion earlier today with regards to these departments that were receiving continuing appropriations in this budget year. And just to be consistent with our desire to see proper reporting requirements, because as these amendments were put forward to allow lapses to be continued into the next fiscal year, in most cases we have no idea the amount of money that we're talking about, or what will be, or what is, or what was decided to be the intended purposes of those funds. So certainly, this amendment is just to simply bring forth the requirement that within 5 days of the quarter, they would provide a report to the administration, to the legislature, so that we know how these funds are being expended as we hopefully be able to phase out this process and know how the funds are being spent or what the intended purposes, or if it has been expended. So we have a clear accounting of these lapse funds. With that, Mr. Chair, that is the purpose of this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, Senator Titlegy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, as a co-sponsor of this amendment, I'd like to thank Senator Brown for allowing me to be on something that's so important, something that's the beginning of trying to be more accountable for our finances. I'm sure that if our OPA, former Speaker B.J. Cruz is watching right now, I'm pretty sure he's happy he's seeing this and that this is going to be put through. So again, I stand in full support of this amendment. And I hope that the agencies that think they're probably going to get lapses in FY24 may think again, because we need to be financially responsible. And if they have the money, they spend it. If they don't, then it goes back to the general fund where other agencies could use this funding. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, if there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Brown, you may close.
I have no further comment, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. We've now closed. That's the last amendment for Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is now closed. We'll take a short recess. We're back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill number 276-36 UR substituted by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriation, and Housing, introduced by the Committee on Rules by request of Imagahaga Guahan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam, an act making appropriations for the operation of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the Government of Guam for fiscal year ending September 30th, 2023, making other appropriations and establishing miscellaneous and administrative provisions, with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to be placed on the third reading file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to rise from the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation that Bill number 276-36 UR substituted and amended in the Committee of the Whole be placed on the third reading file.
On that motion, are there any? On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries.
That's it.
Minute 36 na legislature in Guahan is back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report back to the body after the deliberation of Bill 276-36 UR as substituted and amended in the Committee of the Whole, the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to place on the third reading file.
Is that a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
On the motion to accept the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask that we recess until tomorrow at 9:00 p.m. for voting.
On the motion to recess until 9 p.m. tomorrow and for vote, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're in recess till 9 p.m. tomorrow.